Lately, more and more people have been identifying as trans and seeking medical transition. So why is this happening? In the past, it was extremely rare for people to seek medical transition, with approximately 1 in 10,000 males and 1 in 30,000 females. Then, in the last decade or so, there came an unexplained explosion in the numbers. Suddenly, seemingly out of nowhere, adolescents started to present in ever greater numbers to gender clinics, resulting in a 4,000% rise in female adolescents and a 2,000% rise in male adolescents. The most likely reason for this unexplained phenomenon seems to be rapid onset gender dysphoria, or ROGD for short. The term ROGD describes the phenomenon in which young people with no childhood history of gender dysphoria suddenly identify as trans or non-binary during or after puberty.
This is kind of scary because I only realized this a couple of days ago and I've only come out to a few people. I'm a guy.
This phenomenon is understood as socially mediated, which means that the influence of others leads to and reinforces these young people identifying as trans. Social contagion appears to play a significant role in the development of ROGD, and this is the dominant cohort of patients currently presenting at gender clinics. Social contagion is the spread of affect or behaviors through a population, a process where peers mutually influence each other. Social contagion is associated with many different issues. For example, anorexia, bulimia, self-harming behavior, depressive symptoms, bullying, drug use, and suicidality. So the impact of social contagion should never be underestimated or dismissed. This new ROGD cohort has a number of specific commonalities that indicate that they're extremely vulnerable. The risk of comorbidity is high, and many in this group present with autism, ADHD, OCD, eating disorders, anxiety, depression, body dysmorphia, and other issues. It's notable that a great deal of the ROGD type patients present with autistic spectrum disorder or with moderate to severe autistic traits. A few years ago, physician and researcher Dr. Lisa Littman observed a notable increase in the number of young people identifying as transgender. She also found that these identifications often occurred within friendship groups, which seemed statistically unusual. To explore this phenomenon further, she conducted a study, and on August 16, 2018, she released her research. In this exploratory study, she introduced the term rapid onset gender dysphoria. It takes some time for a diagnosis to come into being, so Dr. Littman's exploratory study on ROGD is simply a description of a phenomenon, not a diagnosis. Dr. Littman interviewed 256 parents about their trans-identified children, and her study revealed that 43% had a history of being isolated from their peers, 45% were engaging in self-harm prior to ROGD, 48% had experienced a traumatic or stressful event also prior to ROGD. 63% had other diagnoses such as a psychiatric disorder or a neurodevelopmental disability, and 69% had social anxiety during adolescence. These are typically sensitive kids. They're often lonely and usually come out as trans following some kind of trauma and after spending an extended period of time online. And so they may experience an intense feeling of relief when they find an online community that is happy to accept and even celebrate them. Some even feel a sense of gender euphoria as they believe they have finally found a path to true happiness, despite the fact that there is no such path and what they've encountered is a false promise. Some of these kids are gay, lesbian, or bisexual. However, a certain portion of them seem to suppress their sexual instinct into a gender identity. They're also often somewhat disconnected from their bodies, preferring to spend hours upon hours on social media, agonizing over their gender identity. And sometimes the young girls will move from identifying as trans masc to non-binary to being a femboy. They might speak knowledgeably about being pangender, however, few of them have ever even been kissed. ROGD youth tend to be cerebral kids, often geeky and naive, but with high intelligence. They're often very creative and report enjoying deviant art, anime, and other online creative pursuits. The typical ROGD kid is generally compliant and enjoys both setting out and following the rules. They can become very invested in issues such as names and pronouns, as their identity becomes a maladaptive coping mechanism. Dr. Lisa Littman's study called Parent Reports of Adolescents and Young Adults Perceived to Show Signs of Rapid Onset Gender Dysphoria was carefully constructed and peer-reviewed. However, trans activists attacked the credibility of her study. They tried to get the paper taken down, and as a result, her paper was subject to a second peer review process. Nothing substantial was altered in this updated version. Simply more detailed information was added. Trans activists also complained that Dr. Lippman had not interviewed the source, the trans-identified young people, but only their parents, ignoring the fact that interviewing parents about their perceptions of their children is a commonly used research method. For example, it can be very helpful to ascertain parents' perceptions of their child's anorexia or anxiety. Dr. Lippman's paper postulates that psychosocial factors such as social influence, social contagion, maladaptive coping mechanisms, trauma, psych issues, and internalized homophobia may be factors in the rise of ROGD-type patients. It's sometimes said that the ROGD girls are trying to escape femininity and all the pressure this entails, while the boys are moving towards femininity as it offers a soft tenderness that they need. In 2018, 83% of the ROGD cohort were female, but the numbers of ROGD boys are also rising, and it's currently estimated that 70% of this cohort are female and 30% are male. Few among these adolescents were gender nonconforming in childhood. There are thousands of parents of ROGD kids in secret networks all across the world. They give support to one another as they try to help their children navigate a difficult adolescence and early adulthood. Life can be pretty agonizing for the parents of ROGD kids as they watch their gullible kids believe they can become a new person with a new identity.
I called my mom today, and I have to go home every day and be called my dead name and have she, her pronouns used every time I go home. And no one realizes how hurtful it is. It's like a slap in the face.
These kids are frequently consumed by their online identity and are encouraged to view their parents as transphobic. They're often, but not always, from privileged backgrounds. However, it should also be noted that a disproportionate level of ROGD kids are found among those in the care system. Families are being destroyed by ROGD. Teenagers are undergoing irreversible medical treatments such as cross-sex hormones and mastectomies. But the ROGD cohort are now coming of age, and many of them appear to be regretting their trans identification. Dr. Lippman followed up her initial study with a study of 100 detransitioners, and this study showed that many detransitioners report experiences that support the ROGD hypothesis, including that their gender dysphoria began during or after puberty, and that mental health issues related to trauma, peers, social media, and difficulty accepting themselves as lesbian, gay, or bisexual were related to their gender dysphoria and desire to transition.
I was convinced that I was actually a boy, even if I wasn't, even if my body was female, and nobody really questioned this belief at all.
This is a vulnerable group of kids. What they need is care and support, and most of all, understanding. What they don't need is to be fast-tracked to a medicalized life or to have irreversible surgeries. To learn more, go to genspec.org. Thanks for watching.